The last of our group to stand up, or to try to stand up, is also the last great mathematician of the 16th century. Noel tells me that he studied with one of Regiomontanus' students whose name he's forgotten, which of course is only to be expected at his time of life. After retiring as professor of discarded astronomy at the University of Chicago, Noel came to SoCal, where he has been reviewing the life's work of his old friends Regiomontanus, Tycho, Kepler, and Galileo. He promises to release his account, now his life's work, grown to 3 volumes before the melting of the Greenland glaciers. This great work, of which I have been allowed to see portions, will be the last million words on the subject. Here it is apposite to describe Noel's contribution to the investigation of difficult things, which I promised you I'd say a word about. This contribution is an edition of a brief tract by Kepler, about which Kepler published during his lifetime only apologies for not publishing it. So we read in Noel's translation that in 1607, Kepler wrote, "I progress very slowly." Then, 10 years later, "How much time I have expended in vain. The problems are very beautiful, the work itself impassable." Another decade. "It will be my next publication if God grants me life." A double fatality then struck. Kepler discovered that he had been using a false theorem, and he died. Verbum sapienti. Noel has published many books and papers in the history of ancient and early modern astronomy and edited many texts, which he has asked me not to mention. But one of his editorial projects deserves mention on this celebratory occasion. This was a compilation in collaboration with Trevor of 3 volumes of essays by Stillman Drake as a tribute to their singular senior colleague at Toronto. Another important part of Noel's benefactions to the Republic of Letters is the very generous help he gives to others trying to master the difficult material he handles so familiarly. Please then welcome Noel Swerdlow, Regiomontanus Redivivus, who will speak on his, or rather Regiomontanus's, defense of scientific publishing.
Among Jed Buchwald's accomplishments, and a way of introducing the subject of this talk, is encouraging and supervising the publication of books in the history of science. I cannot count the number of books, but within the series, Sources and Studies in the History of Mathematics and Physical Sciences, and Archimedes, both published by Springer, and the volumes published by MIT Press, the number is quite large and continues to increase. And in addition is his editing of the Archive for History of Exact Sciences, also published by Springer. All of this is intended to introduce something similar and even more remarkable, more than 500 years earlier, the very beginning of scientific publication by Johannes Müller of Königsberg, known as Regiomontanus, the foremost mathematician and astronomer of his age. To pass rapidly through his life, here's a picture of him. No, wrong way. There you go. He is the figure at the lower right. Whether it's an accurate picture or not, I don't know. The figure at the lower left is Ptolemy, which may also not be so accurate. To pass rapidly through his life, he was born in the small Franconian town of Königsberg in 1436, studied with George Feuerbach at the University of Vienna in the 1450s, went to Italy with Cardinal Johannes Bessarion in 1461, then to the newly founded University of Pressburg in Hungary in 1467, and finally to Nuremberg in 1471. Among his many works of importance were the Epitome of the Almagest. This is actually the frontispiece of the 1496 edition of it. On triangles of every kind, tables of directions and perfections, tables of the first motion, and the first 7-place sine tables to 1 minute of arc. And by the way, they only have about 10 or 12 errors greater than plus or minus 1 in the last place. His intention was to restore the mathematical science to the mathematical sciences all they had achieved in the past, and then build upon that foundation to advance and even perfect them. An essential part of this plan was that scarcely 20 years after the invention of practical typography, he founded in Nuremberg the first printing firm devoted to scientific publication, particularly the mathematical sciences, when not a single scientific work, let alone in the mathematical sciences, had yet been printed. As he described his intention in a letter, "I am undertaking to compose with a letterpress all worthwhile books of mathematics, so that henceforth faulty copies will not annoy readers, no matter how discriminating." For, he explained, manuscript codices are commonly subject to error, and none more than mathematical, where unique elements are used for signifying each thing, and therefore greatly subject to corruption, not to mention astronomical tables, where a single character omitted or transposed or corrupted in any way necessarily ruins an entire page. His first two publications, it appears by 1473, were Feuerbach's New Theories of the Planets, with numerous hand-colored woodcut diagrams, which became the standard instructional text on solar, lunar, and planetary theory for the next century and a half, through more than 50 editions. And by the way, that really is the first scientific book ever printed. And Manilius Astronomica, an astrological poem of the first century. He then began printing his own calendarium in Latin and German editions, containing the ecclesiastical calendar with tables for conjunctions and oppositions of the sun and moon for 1475 to 1532, and diagrams of eclipses of the sun and moon with times and magnitudes for 1475 to 1530. And the most ambitious of all, ephemerides, daily longitudes of the sun, moon, and planets with their astrological aspects for 32 years, 1475 to 1506, which he computed himself, running to some 900 pages. While these were in progress, probably in 1474, he issued a prospectus of what he intended to publish, divided into works by others, almost all the then known this is it. This is the prospectus. Works by others, almost all the then known mathematical and astronomical works of antiquity, the Greek works in Latin translation, some in new translations that he intended that he would translate himself for the first time, with a few more recent works, and what he called the attempts of the artisan, works of his own, about 50 publications in all. He also made some rather sharp and amusing comments about work which he did not approve. In the written version of this talk, I translate that entire thing. The first column are the works of antiquity. The second column are mostly his own works. These are the kinds of remarks he made. Geography by Ptolemy in a new translation, for the old one by Jacopo d'Angelo of Florence, which is in common use, is faulty, since the translator himself, no offense intended, has sufficient knowledge of neither the Greek language nor of mathematics. In this verdict, it will be proper to trust the best judges, Theodore of Gaza, an illustrious gentleman very learned in both Greek and Latin, and Paolo Toscanelli of Florence, by no means unacquainted with the language of the Greeks and extremely distinguished in mathematics. Another, Elements by Euclid with the Anaphorica by Hypsicles, in the edition of Campanus, but with the greatest part of the errors removed, as will also be shown in a special treatise. Then, Defense of Theon of Alexandria against George Trebizond in 6 books, from which anyone will clearly understand that his commentaries on the Almagest are worthless, and that his translation of the work of Ptolemy is not without error. Then, a short treatise by which it is clearly shown that the opinions of Campanus ought to be removed from his edition of the Elements of Euclid. Then, on the quadrature of the circle against Nicholas of Cusa. And by the way, there's more of these that are rather unkind. As impressive as Regiomontanus' perspective is, it is not to be wondered at that his critical, if not dismissive, remarks about a number of respected authors' works and translations were found sufficiently offensive to incite opposition to this arrogant young man's entire project. Not a word of this opposition survives. Presumably it was in conversations and letters, but enough reached Regiomontanus that he decided to answer. He did so in the preface to a work not listed in the prospectus, a dialogue on errors in the old Theorica Planetarum attributed incorrectly to Gerard of Cremona, known from later printings as the Disputations against the Cremonese Nonsense on the Theory of the Planets. It may have appeared in 1475 after the printing of the Calendarium and Ephemerides. The criticism of the old Theorica is sufficiently detailed and technical that one may wonder how many people could follow it or cared enough to do so. But the preface pretty much speaks for itself, even after more than 500 years. Here is part of it, not reading the whole thing. To all those devoted to the good arts, Johannes Regiomontanus sends many greetings. Soon after we published the list of works, which we shall deliver to our publishers to be printed, we learned that some people, more inflamed with zeal to harm than to help, regarded it as worthy of censure that we endeavored to alter the works of some authors, but throw out the works of others entirely, that is, by introducing new translations. Then we criticized many approved and ancient authorities, and especially that we do not fear to consign to oblivion the commentaries of certain more recent writers, even mentioning names which they consider rude. However, since I desired to study clear and correct exemplars rather than either write new ones or copy faulty ones, I must by no means deny that I did this willingly and deliberately, not to disparage the authority of another, but that the study of mathematics, already debased in many places for ages and forsaken by almost everyone, be illuminated by removing every blemish as far as possible, which surely requires both altering a great deal and translating anew. Moreover, advised by the example of almost all those who have ever written something new, we consider it the duty of a man of fair and honorable disposition to criticize writers, however ancient, if they have anywhere erred, as men do. Finally, it should scarcely be thought that we have not spared the names of writers without reason, since some poor wretches, bound by excessive credulity, impute so much value to the celebrated titles of books and the antiquity of their authors that when about to dispute on any subject, they think the highest and strongest ground of demonstration must always be borrowed from an authority, evidently trusting more in any kind of assertion of another than in the most certain reasoning. The death of men who wrote something in life brings about a kind of special indulgence, such that works of those who we perhaps disregarded while they were alive, we religiously venerate now that they are dead, either because one ought not to oppose their opinions, lest it be thought to arise from envy or pride, or because we refuse to shake off the opinions of others and distinguish more subtly, since this generally cannot be done without great labor. For this reason, therefore, I believe it has come about that many learned studies have been reduced to the semblance of some kind of dream or old wives' tale on account of the extremely crude, extremely careless readings and obsequious interpretations. But truly, although this contagion is common to almost all liberal studies, it is nevertheless utterly shameful and intolerable in mathematics, inasmuch as mathematics, by the acknowledgement of all, always displaying invariable certainty, has by the idleness of our age been boiled down to such dregs that in astronomy, for it would be tedious to introduce all of mathematics, we ignore nearly all authors except Gerard of Cremona and Johannes of Sacrobosco. And now we who have looked at their fabrications, namely the Theorica Planetarum and the so-called Sphera Materialis, are praised as astronomers. But as soon as we have also touched upon some kind of rudiments of computation and predictions with tables, then at last we are supposed perfect in all respects. Hence, some of us are sent out to public lectures, doubtless for making students of the same sort as we are ourselves teachers. Others of us are summoned to the councils of princes. Encouraged by their applause, we soon do not blush to pour forth our nonsense in public before a common throng. I am truly ashamed to reckon up how much injury will fall to our lot, for the most part from that cause, and indeed not undeservedly, since through stupid blindness we are the publicists of our own folly. But since in fact these things are expiated by a punishment attached to them, they warrant a less severe censure than the fact that we rush indiscriminately to correct exemplars of the sciences, however abstruse. For unless I am deceived in this, it is a sin to obscure the thoughts of renowned authors with spurious contagions of our own ignorance, and to infect future generations with corrupted copies of books. For who does not know that the wondrous art of printing recently devised by our countrymen is as harmful to men if faulty volumes of books are distributed as it is helpful when exemplars are properly corrected? Friend, would you entrust exemplars filled with problems and very difficult to correct to such a corrector, or rather corrupter? What will happen, I ask, if by the negligence of the translator the first exemplar is obscured by error, or if it is falsely altered by some hungry publisher? Without question, both of these are to be discerned in that work which nowadays circulates as the Geography of Claudius Ptolemy, where neither the literal text of the Greek author agrees with the meanings given by the perverting Jacopo Angelo of Florence. He really had it in for him. Nor do the maps of individual reasons preserve the form drawn up by Ptolemy, but they have been subject to worthless alteration by a starving man. Therefore, anyone who believes he has Ptolemy's cosmography will not even be able to exhibit a shadow of so great a work. And no one will doubt me when I say briefly that this work has not yet been translated into Latin, especially if he learns that on account of its difficulty, it was also lost for a long time among the Greeks and would have perished entirely except that it was rediscovered by the vigilance of a certain monk, Maximus Paludes. But these things will be treated more fully elsewhere. Returning now from where I wandered, lest in blaming the faults of others I seem to exclude myself from that ridiculous herd of astronomers, as though innocent and liable to no error, I now declare myself ready to endure fairly, indeed ready to be immensely grateful to nearly everyone who will examine and pass judgment on my editions, however critically. For although I am aware, through the warning of Horace and Quintilian, that these editions must not be hastened, nevertheless, I must attempt something in the prime of life, lest I merely gratify my stomach like cattle. I suspect, however, that there will be some who will cast up at me the charge of arrogance, as I live in Germany, not to say like a barbarian, lacking books and distant from the concourse of learned men, and I dare to attack so many distinguished men. But unless I am mistaken, they will grant indulgence if they consider the object of what is intended, not the person or circumstances of the writer. For in order that everyone may the more freely and thoroughly examine, judge, correct, and revise my attempts, behold, I set myself up in public of my own accord, and by multifarious translating, not fearing to risk any fortune for the Republic of Letters. Finally, kind readers, we urge that each one examine our efforts according to his own capacity, not indeed without profit, unless someone prefer to despise the honorable mention of his name, which we surely will promise we shall make where opportunity arises in our work. Moreover, no small pleasure comes to the envious if they detect an error, a man daring to do to the unfamiliar. And now we greet all students of astronomy. Unfortunately, little of Regiomontanus' plan for scientific publication came to pass. Not long after The 28th of July, 1475, the date of his last recorded observation in Nuremberg, he journeyed to Rome, summoned by Sixtus IV, it is said, to assist in the reform of the calendar. There he died at the age of 40, apparently on the 6th or 8th of July, 1476, perhaps of plague, which was then epidemic in Rome, although a rumor circulated that he was poisoned by George Trebizond's sons for criticizing Trebizond's translation of the Almagest and his commentary, as he promised to publish in his prospectus. By the way, the work survives, and it is indeed very strong. His death was a great loss to astronomy, to the mathematical sciences, and to scientific publishing. No one of his age understood these as well as he did, and no one could write with such proficiency and clarity. Considering his own capacity for work, including translation, and the level of productivity reached by printers in the 1470s and 80s of 2,000 to 3,000 page settings per year, there is reason to believe that he could have published a substantial number of the works listed in his prospectus in the next 20 or so years. Many, including his own, were printed in the following century, some from his manuscripts. Some of his own were not yet written or have been lost, and since some have not been printed to this day, his great project is still not completed.